March 15th, 2025. The Ides of March, actually, so that's kind of interesting. But anyhow, so reviewing what happened, we've had quite a week there. Of course, we've had a significant stock market crash, and during the week, if you want to call it that, not really a crash, but it did reach correction territory at the end of the day on Thursday. But then it sort of rebuffed a little bit and had a rally on Friday, which probably is short covering. So that's sort of the way I would look at that. It's generally attributed to the tariff policies by many people, but then there's other thoughts that, well, the market was overvalued anyhow, and you get that kind of thing. The other biggie was, of course, that happened Friday is finally the Democrats, at least led by Schumer, eventually agreed to end the filibuster and go ahead and approve the CR so they keep the government open for the rest of the fiscal year. And that's was considered to be kind of a defeat. Almost all the other Democrats are outraged, and especially the more radical elements. And so apparently the Democrats are really opposed to keeping the government open, which is kind of interesting because, of course, the budget that was passed is just a continuing resolution that goes back to the last Biden budget was passed by and the Congress before last. So really, this isn't anything they should be that upset about. But I guess they want to create some kind of disruption to frustrate the Trump policy. So anyhow, that's kind of the way we've got the week off to a start. And of course, the other big news, of course, is the negotiations with Ukraine and Russia. We seem to have managed to finally leverage Ukraine into accepting the minerals deal that Trump proposed, and then without any military guarantees from the United States to Ukraine. And on the other hand, we have then we have a trip from a special representative to Moscow to meet Putin, and well, Putin has basically taken the position, and this is one of the things I was kind of interested in where he would go with this thing. But it took the position, it principally accepts the ceasefire agreement, but he has what he calls some nuances. And so there's going to have to be a little bit more discussion here. At any rate, a specific ceasefire date has not been achieved yet. So if you like these videos, give me a like. You can, of course, subscribe and click the bell for notifications, or you can also follow me on Rumble. The address is in the description below. So yeah, this is one of the things I was kind of sort of interested in seeing is how the Russians were going to respond to this, and it looks to be like that they're going to take the approach of not blowing off the U.S. initiative, because for one thing, they really want to continue dialogue with the U.S. because in a conflict of this sort, all sort of things could go wrong if you don't have communications. I mean, certainly some really crazy things have happened during the course of the 3 years of the war, and so that part is good. There's other issues that the U.S. and Russia might want to talk about, such as Iran and its nuclear program, maybe what's going on with North Korea and its nuclear program, and other things of that sort. So, at any rate, this is the situation. The other thing that would obviously color this to some degree would be the offensive that the Russians have been waging the last several days in the Kursk region, because they seem to be on the verge of driving the Ukrainians who in that pocket, to drive them out of the Kursk region back into their own territory. And so that's an ongoing issue, and obviously the Russians would definitely want to retake all their territory in Kursk before they would actually have a ceasefire. And in fact, that led to another a statement from President Trump to President Putin, of course, and that is the idea that we've had a situation where as due to this offensive, some Ukrainians apparently are surrounded. Trump used the term thousands. I'm not sure it's that many, but there's certainly some Ukrainian troops that were caught in the pocket, and so that leads to a situation where you would have a chance that he's saying that they would be massacred. I don't know about that, But there is the issue that the Russians are charging war crimes. But at any rate, Putin has agreed that if they would surrender by a given time, I think I think it would be actually by the 17th, I think it is, that they would then be taken prisoner and be treated according to, I guess, whatever the standards of taking POWs are in that area. He mentioned, I think, international law, and also mentioned Russian Federation law. So that's an interesting question. But getting back to the real issue that I think is kind of interesting about this subject is, of course, where does it go from here? There's a lot of criticism, I noticed, on the Ukrainian side and the West about Putin's so-called nuances. But on the other hand, they aren't that unreasonable. I mean, the questions are, for instance, during this 30-day truce, will weapons be surged into Ukraine and training exercises be conducted to strengthen the Ukrainian army so that when the 30 days is over, they'll be in a position to resume the offensive if they want to, or at any rate have a stronger defense if Russia were to resume it and if the peace talks don't go in the direction that they want. But the other perhaps even a little bit more legitimate, well, but both are legitimate. I think the other thing, I mean, because obviously the Russians will be, training and reorganizing their forces for whatever they're going to do in the meantime as well. In that case, it might just be a truce for another offensive. And so that's, another situation. The other thing is just the fact that you have this very long front. Was it 2,000 kilometers is what that was stated, and whatever, it's a long front anyhow, and if any violations occur, I mean, who's going to judge this and by what standard? Because obviously, I think from the Russian perspective, Western media is going to definitely blame the Russians no matter who does anything. They've had that experience in the past when often Ukraine is doing things and yet they end up getting blamed by it by the West. So given that situation, I think they're a bit leery about the whole thing. So they have some legitimate questions. But is this just an attempt to stall for time in order to launch a better offensive? Because as within a few weeks, eventually, when we get past the spring season, it might be the optimum time to actually then launch an offensive on either side's part. So this could very well just be spoiling for another offensive. I mean, I would definitely say that the Ukrainians are not necessarily wanting peace. I think the Ukrainians are simply yielding to American pressure, and since we supply so much of the aid, it's pressure they can't ignore. So that's kind of the situation you've got there. On the other issues, back to the economy and all that, I've been kind of looking at the situation with respect to all these tariffs, and the more I'm learning about this, the more I'm really questioning what the whole point of this is. I mean, for one thing, we're just focusing on one aspect of trade. I mean, there's a lot of, they talk about manufactured goods trade, but there's also services trade that these foreign countries buy from the United States. So it kind of is a mixture, and it's also a question of, for instance, if you want to move all these car production plants, as an example, it's often cited, back to the United States territory, how much does that cost? That's not a thing to do that's free. I mean, it doesn't just happen overnight. It'd be one thing to not, move any more out of the United States, but it's something else to say if we got these plants, say, in Canada, and we want to shut them down and move them back to the United States. What would the actual cost of doing that in terms of building new plant? Do we have idle plants that can be quickly restarted, or in fact are these going to have to be new buildings which have all the issues that are involved in new construction and environmental codes and all the stuff that happens? Even if they're expedited by Trump deregulatory policies, it's still going to take time and a lot of money, and who's going to pay for that? Well, it looks like it would be the American consumer, and so a lot of these other things, if we drive up the price of, for instance, aluminum and steel, particularly stuff that's made in Canada, it's a whole different issue, in my opinion, to have to be shipped across the sea because there's big national security implications there. But before we start this, let's get nasty with Canada movement. It seems to me like Canada was a very reliable source where you didn't have to cross the seas to get the material in the U.S., and so it wasn't a national security issue. But now you're going to, let's say you end up paying more because of these extra costs of starting up plant and production here. And maybe the American labor will even be more expensive than Canadian given exchange rate issues and things of that sort. So effectively, you might be in a situation where, in fact, actually it costs more. So you're basically benefiting a relatively few people that work in these jobs, while the majority of people in the country are paying more for all the products that are made out of these things, everything from soda and beer cans to manufactured automobiles or any other item. So it's just an interesting question of why it's worth this much disturbance. The other issue I would raise is that he's been talking about the barriers in Europe and versus selling automobiles. But it turns out that Europe apparently does not have what we call a sales tax. And so, but they do have a value-added tax, which is fairly high, 19%. So then the complaint basically is that their tariff is 7.5% more than ours is on imported cars. And then on the other hand, they have this value-added tax. On the other hand, we have sales taxes in each of the many states. In some places, they go as high as 8 and 9%, particularly when you count the local taxes that are on top of the state sales taxes. So that could be a trade barrier, in fact, for the European cars being brought in too. And for instance, Trump has not taken that into account at all in his claims. And that seems like that should also be looked at as well. And we don't put sales taxes on things that we export to overseas. So why should they put value-added taxes on what they export? I mean, so I think we're really crying foul a little bit harder than we should. The other thing I'd point out is there's also the shipping costs, certainly, to bring things over here. So if they're the theory is that they're driving our manufacturers out of the market or something, but then all the European cars, like the German cars, a lot of the ones are really higher priced cars in many instances compared to maybe some of the more economy models. So I don't know, and the appeal of the car may not be just price. It may also be some kind of emotional, stylistic thinking, which red-blooded Americans may or may not agree with, but certainly the consumers that buy them probably are motivated by things of this sort as much as and their perceptions of reliability, which I understand differ widely depending on the models. But I'm just saying all this seems to me to be a lot of whining over something that really, maybe we just have to compete a little bit better, which I think, in fact, American companies have been in more recent years. So it's not like where things were maybe 45 years ago, where there's a lot of problems, I think, in Detroit, and the Japanese came in with relatively higher quality manufacturing at that time and created a big stir and stole some of our markets, you might say. And so, at any rate, it is just ideas I have on the subject that I think we ought to be very careful what we do about that. Now, the rest of the Trump policies, I mean, closing the border is a fantastic idea, deporting criminals and all that sort of thing I have to agree with. So, I mean, plus, ideas of deregulation, continuing the tax cuts that are in place and not have them expire at the end of the year and jack everybody's taxes up, and many, many more items, ending the DEI programs, and that all this is very good. So overall, I give Trump a high marks. I'm not saying that, but I think he's got this one idiosyncrasy on the trade issue that's a little, maybe not as well thought out as it might be. But we'll see how things turn out. I mean, I think the big dates are up April the 2nd. We'll see what happens then and what that leads to. Anyway, I'll just wrap this up for now and post this both on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the address of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for now.